You're listening to New Churches Podcast, a production of Send Network on newchurches.com. We discuss all things church planting. If you're looking to take your next step toward multiplication, you're in the right place. Newchurches.com provides relevant and reliable resources for church planters, church multipliers, and disciple makers. Our growing library features pastors, planters, and church leaders like Ed Stetzer, David Platt, Trillia Newbell, Christine Hoover, Dahadi Lewis, Trevin Wax, and many others.
Welcome to another episode of the New Churches Podcast. My name is Noah Oldham, and I'm here again with none other than not the man, the myth, the legend, but the man, the fact, the legend, Pastor Vance Pitman. Good to be in the studio with you, brother.
No, you never cease to amaze me with the language you create to say something about me at the beginning to make me feel uncomfortable. But it's great to be here. It's always a joy to get to do this with you. I really enjoy getting to hang out. And again, I'm super excited to have a returning guest today on the podcast who's somebody that I just consider a dear friend, a brother, somebody I've learned from, looked up to, so respect. So Noah, tell us who's with us today and what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, today we're talking about something we have seen modeled for us in church planting all the way back to the book of Acts, the subject of good mentoring relationships. And to help us with this subject today is a man who is deeply passionate about it, Dr. Crawford Loritts. He's the president and founder of Beyond Our Generation, an organization committed to helping to shape the next generation of leaders. He's been a church planter, served for 27 years on staff of Campus Crusade for Christ, and 15 years as senior pastor of Fellowship Bible Church there in Roswell, Georgia. Crawford and his wife, Karen, have 4 adult children, 11 grandchildren. He's been with us on the podcast before. Crawford, welcome back to the New Churches Podcast.
Oh, it's always good to be back with you guys, stimulating and invigorating.
Amen. And I love that line in the bio, 11 grandchildren.
Yes,
the grandchildren,
sir. That's
where it's at, right?
Absolutely. I've told our kids their only reason for existence is transportation for my grandkids, man.
I tell mine, being a grandparent is all of the grand and none of the parenting. Like,
there you go, brother.
It's awesome. I love it.
Yes,
it's
sir.
great.
Well, today we're talking about mentoring, and just to get into that, just a personal thing here, Crawford, you don't know this, but you have served as an unofficial preaching mentor for me for the last 14 years. I sat in your polemic preaching breakout at the Gospel Coalition in 2009, and still to this day, even this last week, every time I handle a polemic text, I think of your illustration at the very end. You said you bring people underneath the darkness of that difficult text, but always turn the light switch on before you leave, the light of the gospel. So thank you for the way you've mentored me from afar for all these years.
Oh, you are very, very kind, my friend. That's humbling.
Well, you are passionate about encouraging the next generation of leaders for the cause of Christ. What experiences in your own life led to this kind of passion?
You know, I got to tell you, it's because God brought people into my life at every strategic turn. It gets back to actually the way I grew up. My dad, next to Jesus, has had the greatest influence in my life. It just seems like my whole life, God has dropped people in at strategic moments. The pastor that led me to Christ really believed in young people. He was bivocational, poured into us. Oh, man, I could just tell you all these people. And when I was in my late teens and early 20s, there were people who saw things in me that I didn't even see in myself. And so there is just this debt of gratitude that I have. And it even goes back to my great grandfather, Peter, who was a slave, and the stories passed down from one generation to the next. My whole family, on my dad's side, the men in that family had this strong sense of encouraging the next generation. It's kind of like sovereign foundation. So it's a little bit of a stewardship responsibility I feel in my life. And God's been so gracious and good to me. When I'm tempted to get a little full of myself, I remember that, hey, look, buddy, you're the turtle on the fence post. You didn't climb up there, brother. Somebody put you there. And so, and it's just my passion. And another piece of this, you didn't ask me all of this, but another piece of this is realizing that, the disconnectedness in our culture, the hyper individualism has caused us to be separate. And And so you end up making mistakes that you don't necessarily have to make if we got closer to one another. I used to tell my sons this, those knucklehead boys of mine, Brian and Brendan, when they were growing up, I used to tell them the experience is not always the best teacher, but it is the only school a fool will attend. And you don't have to make some of those mistakes if you listen. And so these are all those motivational pieces inside of it.
That's really good. I've said to some young leaders that are in my life that I'm pouring into, I said, there's two ways to learn how to do your job. There's humility and there's hardship. There are only two schools to go to. And you can either humble yourself and listen to some people further down the road than you, or you can face the hardship of bad decisions. And that's what good mentoring is really about. It's about humbling yourself and listening. So what would you say are what defines a good mentoring relationship in somebody's life?
Well, they're in several buckets here. I think you can't have a good mentoring relationship until there's demonstrated humility and teachability. It's just not gonna happen. And so you need both the mentor and the mentee need to be humble and teachable. Then there's the chemistry issues. Sometimes you just don't connect with someone. It's not a spiritual thing. It's anything like that. Your personalities are different. But I think the thing that I look for aggressive followers. Aggressive followers. You don't want someone who is so needy that they latch onto you and you become their surrogate identity. That's draining. That is draining. Neither do you want somebody hanging out with you because they're unduly impressed with you. All right. But what you want to see is, I want to see people who will take initiative to get their needs met, who will phrase their questions in such a way that they own the execution of the answer. That's what you're looking for in a mentor relationship. And sometimes people are just not ready. They want to hang with you, but they're not ready to grow. And so you just need to back away from them until they get to a point where they are ready. They're ready to respond. But what also makes a great mentoring relationship is that the mentor knows that, hey, look, they're not the 67th book of the Bible. That they have to understand that they influence, but they don't control. And you never want to get in a relationship where a mentor doesn't know the difference between appropriate authority and a domineering relationship. And you don't expect people. I tell the guys that I pour into, look, I don't expect you to agree with everything, and I'm not infallible. And so, there's humility on both sides, but there's also accountability too.
That's really.
But what you have to learn about accountability is not control. You can't make somebody accountable. You can't do it. And so by accountability, what I mean, you look for them to respond to what you're saying and behavior that's consistent with integrity. And so I think it's those things that make for a good mentoring relationship.
Dr. Loritts, you talked a lot about leading to this next question of expectations. You served for over 2 decades in Campus Crusade for Christ. You're around young people all the time. You probably heard them talk about the DTR, the talk of determining the relationship, setting expectations. What are we doing here? As we think about church planters, not only mentoring others, but being mentored by somebody, what are some of those ways that they can set those expectations so that they know what this relationship is all about? How do they establish that?
Well, they need to sit down and figure out, what do you want? What's your need? What are the gaps in your life? And look for a relationship that God can use to help you to get to where you need to be. But I think it's some forethought. Where are you? What do you really need? Where are you in your journey? I think that there are 3 20-year periods in our lives, in a ministry life. From 20 to 40 is that season of learning. And I'm not saying that God's not using you, using it in very significant ways, but you're learning who you are and who you're not. That's a season in which you are obsessed with self-actualization. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And the temptation is to prematurely typecast yourself.
Mm.
And so in that season, you need somebody who's like a patriarch or way down the road to help you understand, no, this is okay, chill. But just to understand and appreciate where you are.
Yeah.
Then the ages, I'd say end of your 30s, around 40 to late 50s or 60s, that is that period of leveraging. It's during that time in which, you've gotten the snot knocked out of you and you know who you are, you know who you're not. There's a healthy sense of objectivity about your ministry, and experience has begun to morph into this wonderful wisdom. And by the way, wisdom you can't microwave. You can Google knowledge, but you can't Google wisdom.
Wow.
It just takes time. And so you need to know, am I in this season and what do I need during that time? Then, of course, there's the last season. I call that leaving. And I don't mean leaving the ministry. This is ages 60 and on, where you have stepped into a patriarch phase. And patriarchs are those that are branded by nobility. In other words, when I say noble, you understand that which is enduringly and refreshingly always right. It was right 3,000 years ago. It's going to be right over here. And you know the difference between a trend and a fad at this point. And you're able to help these generations, whether they're 20 to 40 or 40 to 60, to organize their lives around that which is enduring. But you need to know where you are, and you need to know what you need and identify that.
So once they identify that this is what I need to grow in this area of life or this area of ministry, how do they go about finding that mentor as a mentee?
Well, I think, obviously, if you look around you, they're more available than you might think. They're more available than you might think. And, I would go to people that who are in leadership, Vance, myself, other people that are in your spheres of influence that we know people and say, look, I think so-and-so can help you with this. Or here's, this person is available to help you with this. And sometimes effective mentors are people who don't necessarily have big names or platforms.
Yep.
These are men and women of godly character. And so just keep your eyes open. The first thing to do is drop to your knees and pray. God, there's a gap in this area of my life, and I've got some issues in who I am, and it's affecting my marriage and my relationship with my kids, and I need somebody to help step in. And then you humble yourself, and then take the initiative to ask. Just to ask. You'd be shocked the number of people who are standing around and say, yeah, I'd love to help you. I'd love to help you. And step in, so I think I don't think it's as difficult as you might think it is. They're there.
Sometimes when you think about mentors, everybody runs to the platform personality. And unfortunately, a lot of times with the platform personality, everything they got, you got from the platform. Like that's what you got. In my life, the biggest mentor in my life was a guy named Clyde Cranford.
Oh my gosh.
Nobody's ever heard of him. Like nobody knows his name.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, the trajectory of my life and the impact of the ministry God's given me is directly linked to the life of a man named Clyde Cranford that God used to spend 2 years, 3 hours a week, just pouring into my life.
Oh, yeah.
And forever changed the course of my life and my family and the next generation of my family. And when you think about the New Testament missiology with Paul, Paul's greatest mentor was Barnabas.
Yeah.
Barnabas is only known in the Bible because of his proximity to Paul.
Yeah,
he didn't write any books of the Bible. He didn't plant any of the, he was not the celebrity. Paul was. We only know, but there would be no Paul. If you read in Acts 11, Paul quit and went home to Tarshish. Barnabas went and found him, brought him to Antioch. There'd be no Paul without Barnabas. And yet we're looking for the named guys. And a lot of times it's the unnamed heroes that you're talking about. I love that.
That's exactly right. You just triggered something. I think every person going into ministry needs to make a serious personal study of 2 Timothy. where this is a pattern for resilience, for strength, how to get through. It's interesting as you read this letter to Timothy. Paul's about ready to die. He gives them the enduring essence of what it takes to make it home before dark. How are you going to survive? He doesn't coddle Timothy, by the way. I mean, it's like he reaches out and grabs him by the lapels, and he says, "Okay, Nero's torching Christians, and this church is taking your lunch money, and you're in this situation. And by the way, I'm about to die, and I know how you feel about me." But he says, you've got this charge here. So he tells him, you got to remember who you are. You got a legacy of faith. You're loved and valued. You've got a gift. So, son, you got to show up. And he encourages him to be what the calling requires. To be what the calling requires. And actually, mentoring is not about just coddling people when they're hurting. That's part of it. But mentoring is about putting wind in sails and giving people what they need to run through the finish line.
Wow.
To run through the finish line. Part of my struggle, and by the way, I just have to, I need to be careful here. I am a fan of this younger generation. I'm a huge fan. Their creativity, the fact that they're not typecast, and all of it is absolutely wonderful. But there's one thing that I really, really am very, very, very concerned about. There's a tendency that when the heat gets turned up, when things get a little hot and adversity comes, there's the tendency to run and to shift and to change your environment. The problem with that is that there's no such thing as character apart from endurance. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as character apart from endurance and opposition in hard times. That's where the resilience that you're looking for is built. And so what they need is portraits of men and women who have gone through stuff, who've labored through it, put their arms around it and say, okay, no, you're going to make it home. You can do this. But don't run, son. Don't run, because when you run, you're actually putting holes in the gas tank, man. You're going to run out of fuel. The fuel that you need is found in what you don't like.
Whoa.
You see, because on your way to doing something, you got to become something, right?
Ooh.
And if you don't let the doing help you to become, then you're just going to be gigging, man. You're going to be standing up there. You're going to be, looking for applause and this kind of thing. You're going to be operating from your gifts, but you're going to be thin and empty.
Man, we're on a podcast, but if we were at the church building, I'd stand up and point at you right now. I'd just stand up and point, because that's what's demanded in this moment, because that is preaching.
Yeah,
absolutely. But and the other piece is, and I'm just this stream of consciousness here. I heard a good friend of mine say this several months ago, and I really have latched onto it. I think we need three kinds of people in our lives, particularly if you're in ministry, right? Everybody needs a Joab who'll fight for them. Right? Okay, we need that. We need a Jonathan that will love us unconditionally. But then we also need a Nathan who will tell us when we're stupid.
Hey.
And if you don't have that kind of, those three kinds of people in your life, you're a little bit handicapped. You're a little bit dwarfed and deformed in your development. We need those folks.
Wow. Man, the importance of mentoring and having mentors, huge for church planting in this next generation. Dr. Loritts, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. I wish we had time for hours of this. I know you could just riff and pour out, and we'll have you back on the podcast to do more of that real soon. But thank you, everyone else, for listening to the New Churches podcast. Until next time, may we all heed the words of Paul in 2 Timothy 2:2 and take what we've received and entrust it to faithful men that they might teach others also. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to the New Churches Podcast, brought to you by Send Network. If you like what you heard, take a few minutes to rate and review us or share this episode with a friend. It's the best way to show your support. To find more reliable resources to start your new church well, visit newchurches.com.